I'll go ahead and get started so we can stick on time today. Um, Thanks for joining, everyone. This is now number 7 in our webinar series, which has been really great. And thanks for folks that are joining for repeat webinars. For if there is anybody new, I'll just give a very quick intro to Bikepacking Roots. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit focused on growing and supporting the bikepacking community, primarily across the US, but it's great we have folks that follow us and support us from all around the world. Our 3 pillars are routes, community, and advocacy. So we build routes and work with stewards to showcase their routes. We do educational programming such as this. We host beginner-friendly overnight bikepacking trips, which we'll be doing more of this year. And we also do advocacy supporting access to and conservation of lands through which bikepackers ride, and advocating on behalf of the bikepacking community. So happy you're here. Hopefully you continue to follow along with what we're doing and support us. And with that, we can jump into today's webinar.
Hey everyone, I'm Kait Boyle. Like Noelle said, you're likely returning to this webinar workshop series at this point. So hopefully my face isn't too new, and hopefully at this point you're also not tired of it. If you are new, just a brief intro. I am a co-founder of Bikepacking Roots. These days I work more on the community and education side of projects. And I started bikepacking in 2010 when I broke an ankle climbing, and that led to riding the Great Divide mountain bike route on my single speed and then bikepacking all over the world. And that has led to being able to now have a career as a professional bikepacker and mountain bike athlete. And this workshop tonight, while out bikepacking, camp and bikepacking skills and leave no trace, will be the last one that I'm personally teaching. Our final workshop I'll talk about at the end of this workshop tonight. But this one is, in a way, kind of the catch-all from the prior 6 workshops where we have talked about everything you need to know to get started. We've talked about route planning, we've talked about gear and bike setup and packing your bike. We've talked about food and water, mindset, self-care, bike bags, bike bag care, and advanced route building and navigation. And so this workshop, I've said this about a couple, but it's one of my favorites because it is really that element. It's addressing the skills that make bikepacking, the multi-day element. A lot of these will be camping based, while we have talked about bikepacking can very much be more of a shelter to shelter or hut to hut or hotel to hotel. Like that all is bikepacking. And a lot of these skills also apply to just longer day rides. And so whether you are new to bikepacking, a veteran bikepacker, you like to bikepack on paved roads from hotel to hotel, or on just single track with remote primitive camping, all of what we're going to talk about should apply. This workshop will wrap up with a kind of a bit more education on a campaign we did with Leave No Trace a couple years ago. And this does draw on my background as an outdoor educator, where I taught adventure education for Prescott College, Knowles, and Outward Bound for 10 or 12 years prior to doing this more full time. So a lot of these are exciting topics, and based on questions from past workshops, I've structured this to be more focused on topics that people have seemed to be really interested in. Before I go through the run through of tonight's show, to address kind of the why this, a lot of these skills that we're going to talk about can be self-taught. They can be like information or skills that are passed down from riding partners. Maybe you transferred them over from backpacking or a different outdoor sport. And when we think about bikepacking as a whole discipline or user group or community, then we can think about also the skills that we take into those landscapes and communities that we ride through. And a lot of when we get into this final section, we'll think about the impact that we have. And so while we talked a lot about planning for trips and setting ourselves up for success, some of these skills are more the like how we implement the plan while out in order to maximize our own success on our trip and ability to have fun, but also our ability to stay safe, which we'll talk about what that kind of means and manage risk, while also then having a positive impact on the places and people we interact with as we ride. Okay, so tonight I've broken this into 3 topics. They're all the art of bikepacking. So the art of staying safe, we're going to talk about risk management. Safe is not the word we really want to focus on. It's more managing risk. And I'm going to break that down in when we dive into it more. And while there are a variety of different elements to this that we could spend a lot of time on based on a lot of questions or throughout this entire series, I'm really focusing on bike care and handling bears, which I think have come up pretty much anytime there's an opportunity to ask about them, riding solo and staying warm and dry. And then the art of good camping, which is also connected to risk management. We're going to talk more about campsite selection, stormproofing, shelters, and a couple other skills that I feel very strongly about bikepackers doing a really good job with, which I'll leave that as a little hanging question mark as to I wonder if anyone can guess what those topics will be. Feel free to drop those in the chat. And then finally, the art of being a good bikepacker. And that will be bringing in the Love Where You Ride campaign with Leave No Trace for bikepackers and how bikepacking routes took those 7 principles of Leave No Trace a bit further to think about even more broadly how to have a positive impact while bikepacking. As always, I will end each section with a Q&A, pause for me to pause talking and have a sip of water while addressing any questions that you all put into the Q&A. Noelle will then feed those to me. So thanks for being here. Okay, so the art of staying safe, risk management. We're going to start really broad stroke here. Safety is all relative to what our perception of risk is and what we have the ability to manage or what is it within our control and outside of our control. In these outdoor settings, we use more the terms risk management as a way to think about what the hazards are and what of those we can control, what decisions can we make, what plans can we put into practice in order to mitigate that risk. And in this, while institutions will have kind of like what is acceptable risk, as an individual bikepacking, you get to decide that. So you get to decide, do you feel so strongly about not wearing a helmet that you're going to take on the risk of bikepacking without a helmet? I'm not here to tell you what decision to make, but that is a decision that you get to assess with the risk. And then when we think about those kind of some categories, there's environmental risks, there's riding risks, and there's camping risks. And it is inevitable that when setting out, by getting out of bed every day, we take on risk. I think it's really easy to get caught up in maybe not caught up, but to focus on how when things are unknown, they feel more risky. And I think we can manage some of the stress around that by identifying the risk and having a plan for it. And also then with that, knowing what is it that you want to subject yourself to. Like if you are really scared of lightning, which is very fair, it is a very scary thing, and that could be potentially more traumatizing for you, then you don't have to put yourself in a situation by bikepacking during a season or a weather period where lightning is likely or where you're really exposed to it and wouldn't have shelter. But this really circles full circle back to that first workshop of getting started and planning ahead and preparing, because most of these can be addressed with a plan ahead of time and just even knowing what you might face. So, to get more into some of these more specifically that I believe folks have been fairly interested in, when we think about the risk inherent in bike packing, we think about loaded bikes and how is riding them differently. Um, Bike packing bikes are generally inherently heavier unless you're truly riding from in a supported way from like hut to hut or hotel to hotel and you're not carrying anything. But when carrying your gear and riding a loaded bike, your bike is heavier and so therefore it is less controllable. Um, Ways we can manage that are to break earlier, to make sure that when you stop and put a foot down, whether it's because of something unexpected or um, in technical terrain, that you put your foot down on the uphill side. And while it sounds really simple with a heavier bike, that is you're working with gravity to stop the momentum of that bike. Whereas when you put a foot down on the downhill side, you're more likely to topple over with a 50, 60, 70 pound bike on top of you. And then bike, well, it's again sounds basic. And in my years of teaching bike packing, what I witness over and over is people kind of anticipating that they can exert the same amount of energy to pedal the heavier bike as they would a lighter bike. And that leads to bonking a lot earlier, trying to muscle through sections like climbs or more challenging parts of the route that they would expect they'd be able to ride with a lighter bike. And what this ultimately can lead to is just the inevitable bonk, or not the inevitable, but the dreaded bonk, and then putting yourself at higher risk for other things like dehydration or low energy, and then you're not making good decisions because your brain has bonked. And so just approaching your bike packing trip with the awareness of your bike being heavier and needing to ride it more technically differently, and then also in an energy expenditure differently. Thinking workshop 4, might have been 3. We talked about food and water and went really deep into ways to prevent bunking, and this would be the more risk management side of bike handling. One thing with bike handling, if you're riding a mountain bike and have a dropper post, often those aren't very usable when bike packing with the seat bag, unless you're lucky enough to be like 6.5 feet tall or have really small wheels. I'm 5'2", and I love being able to descend with a dropper post because my bike handling is a lot better, and I can have more control over my bike when my dropper, even if it's not fully down, is partway down. And something that I will sometimes do is to just pull my seat bag off, and if I'm carrying a backpack, strap it to my backpack for descents. And that is just one strategy. And you can also do that with your handlebar bag. If you do like a long hike a bike, you can make the front end heavier just by rearranging bags. And that's something that you just don't often see people doing or necessarily think about doing, but rearranging your bags in order to allow you to handle your bike better for a certain section, even if it's not the ideal setup for the whole trip, but even just a descent or a climb, that can go a really long way. It's a little pro tip. Another thing that I experience, and it's a constant battle for me, for me, it's kind of like flossing. Like I know I should, and I just don't want to, um, is the bikepacking bike maintenance exercise. Our next workshop is going to be about troubleshooting mechanicals in the field, but there's a lot that you can do to prevent mechanicals. And tied to this topic, in preventing mechanicals and keeping an eye on your bike on multi-day trips, you're also preventing incidents from happening. Because again, with the heavier bike, the consequences of like your handlebars rotating or your rotor um bolts backing out or your through axle backing out or that cage that you strap to the stanchion of your fork getting loose and rotating. All of those can often be prevented if you just catch it before it turns into a mechanical that causes an incident like a crash. So, um, just the little bike packing, bike maintenance checklist. Ideally, we would do this when we get to camp. And I'm only laughing because, like, the flossing thing, honestly, it's the last thing I really want to do when I get to camp. Usually, when I get to camp, I want to sit down. But at some point in the evening, go as you're putting camp away or as you're like waiting for your water to boil, going through a quick run through on your bike will help you sleep well at night, knowing that your bike's in good shape. It's like putting the horse to bed. And the reason at night is probably better than the morning is generally we have more time in the evening. And if there's something wrong, then you have time to figure out what to do. I've been on a number of trips where in the morning that problem has been identified. Right as everyone is dressed and ready to get going, then you're like, oh, okay, never mind. Now we're gonna stop and pull out our puffy jackets and get pretty comfortable because there's some problems to fix. So I run through just a bolt check, a brake check, which includes making sure that my brakes are pulling evenly to the bars. There doesn't feel like there's significant air bubbles in them. The rotor bolts are tight, and when I spin the wheel, it's not rubbing. The wheels, I generally check air pressure, just spin around, making sure there isn't anything gaping out of them. It's kind of amazing with tubeless tires, the things that can end up in your wheels without having any idea. I've literally had a nail going through my tire and I had no clue until I stopped and looked at it. I was like, oh wow, there's a nail going in one side and out the other. And it went through and plugged so quickly that it barely lost any pressure. But that's not something you want to rely on staying in there and being a part of your general riding situation, so that would take repairing. Wheels also, it's just good to kind of go through and do a squeeze on your spokes, make sure everything feels relatively taut. There's nothing clearly broken, bent, or flopping. And the frame part can be hard because of how dirty our bikes get, but we just want to keep an eye on our frames. Like I have broken steel frames bike packing. I have not broken a carbon frame bike packing, but I know people who have, especially when there's been mud involved. And so just paying attention even to how your bike packing bags are rubbing on the bike, it will go a long way in just making sure that that kind of treasured part of your bike doesn't break. And then lastly, or not lastly, but the last two are cranks and cables. Cables, especially because they tend to get pinched by bags. I make sure they're just still where I want them to be, particularly around the handlebar harness, and aren't getting pinched under any bags or causing any other rubbing on my frame. Everything is working, like my brakes and my droppers and my shifters. Maybe rearrange something if I need to. And with cranks, just making sure that they're tight. Like I think one of a kind of common longer term bike packing problem are people's cranks falling off or seizing. So that's just like kind of the spin, making sure the bottom bracket bearings feel smooth. And the pedals and the crank bolts are tight. So complete shift from bikes to bears. This we've had a lot of questions about bears, understandably. We live in a world now. I know that people call in from other countries. In the US, there's a lot of wild landscape still left. And that said, there are far fewer bigger predator, higher in the food chain critters out there than there were once in human time. And I think especially with the size of our more human developed areas and inevitably taking over wildlife habitat, we don't interact with bigger wildlife as much as people used to. Um, and bears are rightfully have there's a lot of fear around them, and depending on what kind of bear habitat and where in the country they can have various different reputations. Like the California bears have a huge reputation for getting into everything. And then grizzly bears are, of course, known for being a lot more aggressive and potentially more more dangerous often than black bears are perceived. So, knowing that with like bike travel, we can travel long distances and move in and out of habitat pretty relatively quickly. I just wanted to take some time to talk about bike packing in bear country. In the post workshop PDF, I'm going to talk or share a lot more resources with this because there's some great resources out there just for how to use bear spray, how to respond to different bear responses when you surprise them, or if they're actually stalking you, which is actually pretty rare in the lower 48 with grizzly bears and black bears. Um, but to start, when thinking about bears and camping, one of the best things you can do is just to camp with really good um, bear, and this kind of applies to a lot of other critters, bear camping practices. And this is for sure something you should do in any grizzly bear country and in more dense black bear country, and a lot of places now in California and even some places now in Colorado are requiring that people camp in ways that at least secure food. And so the kind of bear camping triangle is the first thing I want to share. And so here on the slide, you have your tent area, you have where you would store your food, which in this example is a bear hang. And I'll talk about others in a moment. And then you have your kitchen. And these are all 100 yards apart, creating a triangle. A lot of bikepackers like to camp, and a lot of backpackers, a lot of just campers out there, not with vehicles, like to camp with all their stuff in one place. Like 100 yards kind of takes a bit of time to walk to and from. And when especially dispersed camping, it can be sometimes challenging to find the ideal setting for all of this. And thinking about your wind direction is really helpful because bears are very much have a much stronger nose scent. No, I'm struggling with my words now. They're going to be able to tune into the environment with their nose a lot sooner than they are with their eyes and ears. And so the wind can help facilitate the bear being aware of your camp, so that you are not trying to send the smell of food to your tents. And that is why the bear hang, where you're storing your food, and your kitchen, where you're cooking and eating your food, is downwind of your tents. Um, and with that, it should just be clarified that like the tents are pretty much scent free as far as smellables. Like we don't bring food or toothpaste or chapstick to our tents and then back to the kitchen. But the best bear camping practices in these areas where you want to um really minimize your risk of having a bad bear encounter at camp are to have all of your food cooked and eaten in the kitchen and then stored at 100 yards away, also downwind of your 100-yard away tent. With the food storage when bike packing, I have used two different strategies with success that I recommend a lot. The bear hang is really easy to do when there are going to be trees around. All you need to bring that would be extra is I bring about 50 feet of P cord, like parachute cord. And that's it, because your handlebar bags are really the perfect bear hang size. Like it is a dry bag, it's waterproof. A mouse is maybe gonna get into it, but it most likely probably not. It can be like it'll store your food safe from the elements. And it has most of them have like a convenient roll top closure. And so you can just roll top it closed, you have a loop, and then you can tie that parachute cord to it and set up your bear hang. If you've never set up a bear hang, I recommend watching a video on how to do this, and having a plan for how you're going to throw it. I usually tie my P cord around a rock, and ask whoever in my group that's better than throwing at me to throw it. but I have successfully set up my own bear hangs despite having horrible aim. The goal with these is to use a tree. It should be alive. You don't want to be pulling branches or trees down on top of you when you're hauling your food up. That has actually killed people in the past, which is tragic. And you want to get your food, sorry, this is a very small drawing, but they say at least 12 to 15 feet off the ground. You also want the bag hanging at least 4 to 5 feet below the branch because bears can climb trees and about at least, well, depending on where you look, but 5 to 10-ish feet hanging away from the trunk of the tree. And this is just so that a bear climbing a tree can't actually reach its giant long arm and hand and paw out and grab that food. So it's ultimately just like dangling in the air. And then you tie it off to a different tree. That's really easy. I live in Idaho in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem where there are grizzly bears. I mean, they're hibernating right now, but they're here. They pass through my valley. And so when I go bikepacking or camping locally, that's what I use. Another option is an ursack. Um, if you're traveling somewhere where food storage is required, you'd need to make sure that they allow ursacks. But ursacks, which I'll put a link to in the post-workshop recording as well, are great because they are bags that are made of this incredibly strong material that bears can't tear open or bite open. And when your food is in this sack and enclosed, it can actually just be like tied around a tree or sitting on the ground, even. Like, you don't want it to be able to be like batted away, but because then you'd have to find your food. But you but that is a really effective way to store food in any bear habitat. Kind of ironically, the closure is like not super tiny, so it actually wouldn't keep mice out unless you figured out how to really like cinch it closed, maybe with a volet strap. But they're a great strategy too for keeping some other critters out. Um, Generally, mice and ravens have been the other animals that I've just struggled to keep out of my food. Um, so yeah, the we'll come back to other critters in a moment, but that's the whole food storage when camping situation. And I guess I should just add, like, whenever there's a food storage box provided at a campground, use that because those are meant for that. And I would try to sleep as far away from it as possible. With grizzly bear country, bringing bear spray on your bike in a place that's deployable. There's constant debate here in the Tetons about if deployable is right on your bike or right on your waist, because if you got separated from your bike, then how do you deploy your bear spray? But if you crashed, you don't want the bear spray deploying because you like land on your hip. So you get to decide that. There's all sorts of different holsters out there for carrying bear spray on bikes and on your body. The main thing is that you just need to be able to pull it out instantly and not have to be like fuddling around with straps or clips or zippers, or like reaching, like somehow suddenly having mobility that you've never had in your life to reach behind you into your backpack. And so that's the main thing. Bear spray is only effective once it's like in your hand and being used. Bear calls are also an option, especially when, like, the main thing with bears, with grizzly bears and black bears, is you just don't want to surprise them. Grizzly bears and black bears predominantly don't want anything to do with us because we have established ourselves as the top of the food chain, and they generally are would rather not have anything to do with us. That said, like any animal, when surprised, their immediate reaction could be to fight rather than to flee, just like our immediate reaction could be to do that. Um, and so to prevent the surprising them element, making noise when traveling in thicker vegetated areas, or even when it's not thick, but there's a strong wind. And again, if you're traveling into a strong headwind, the wind is taking your presence, like your sound and your smell away, like behind you, whereas a bear ahead of you may be surprised. So just working to make yourself known. It can feel ridiculous to be riding along yelling, "Hey bear." You can sing, you can yell, "Hey bear," you can just make occasional whoop, or not occasional, but you can make loud whoops. And one thing that I found interesting when we were working with the for Leave No Trace of Outdoor Ethics, is that research has shown that bells don't work. And so just putting a bell on your bike and calling it good is apparently um, not going to really help your case in not surprising a bear. And that research came from the National Park Service. Um, so kind of moving, there's an interesting, if you're not looking at the screen, there on the screen, there is a pretty helpful bear identifier key, which when traveling in true grizzly bear habitat can be helpful. If you go to the resource links in the post workshop PDF, you'll see there's a link to handling encounters with black bears versus grizzly bears. They are different. And so being able to first identify them is really helpful because their color and their size can be very misleading. Think there are I've heard a lot of people in California and Colorado swear they've seen grizzly bears in those states. But that's because there are a lot of black bears who are brown and can be chestnut and red and also gigantic. And then there also can be small grizzly bears. They're just the ones that are still growing up. um, so thinking about other animals, I'm sure in the Q&As we'll get other animal questions. But general management for other animals is just, I think that storing your food away from where you're sleeping is really good practice. It's not going to draw unwanted critters to you. If when not camping in bear habitat, I store my food in my frame bag on my bike, and then I sleep with my bike not right next to me, but a ways away. Um, Checking your shoes for insects or your sleeping bag or clothes if they're laid out before you get in them is just good practice. It's not to freak you out. It's just good. Like if you've set up a nice warm thing, who knows who you invited into that just to like get some shelter while you were cooking dinner and your sleeping bag was fluffing up. So just give it a shake in the morning, just turn your shoes over. Like it can just be second nature practice that can help prevent a bite or a sting. And then a main one is just paying attention to habitat, everything from ants to elk to bears. Well, if we just kind of blindly show up somewhere tired, expecting to camp, and then suddenly find ourselves camped in someone's den, whether it's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of ants, or where the elk are denning, or where the bears have been browsing, like all of that only increases our likelihood of having a negative encounter because we're in someone's home. And so just by paying attention to our surroundings and choosing where we camp, so we're not right where someone's going to try to return to or reoccupy, will go a long way. Okay. The next one in this kind of risk management category is going solo. So bikepacking solo can be an incredible experience for experiencing solitude, for personal reflection, for deeper connections to the places and the people that you encounter along the way, for being able to be on your own agenda. And for some people, it's also just really the only option because maybe you don't know other bikepackers who will do what you want to do in the way that you want to do it. And for a lot of people, and myself included for a long time, and still to an extent today, we can feel intimidated by traveling solo because of the increased sense of vulnerability. And so in the chat, I would love for you to share if you do ride solo, could include a little why. If you don't, but you want to, and what is holding you back. And if you have no interest in riding solo, you're welcome to say anything, with whether you or just not sure. And maybe include the what you love about it if you're saying you love about it. Okay. Oh, it can be therapeutic. I like that. Yeah, apprehensive, to be on your own timeline. So keep these coming. These are awesome. Oh, yes, we're getting into the ways of managing it. So coming up next, yeah, is so where there are a number of different risks. We're talking about risk management. So there are a couple of additional risks to riding solo. The first is that you're by yourself. And so if something happened, whether it's medical or like a accident happened that caused needing first aid, then you are by yourself and you don't have someone who's there to immediately help you. And so you need to either be comfortable with your own ability to respond, whether it's using a SOS button or being able to treat yourself, or you need to be comfortable accepting the risk and the consequence of knowing that if something happened that like that you can't respond to, that you really just have to trust that things will work out. And then another one is the personal safety element. And I know a lot of people of more minority identities can feel a lot more at risk and like their personal safety is more vulnerable by being solo and not having that kind of strength in numbers of having someone else to help protect them from other people or animals. I think it's generally really other people in my experience, at least as a female and from other folks that I've talked to, it's being scared of bad interactions with other folks who would be predatory towards us for who we are. Um, and so something I have here a list of ways to manage those risks and something that I want to just invite you all that do really like bike packing, and I love that this is already happening, but do like bike packing solo, is just include any of the strategies that you really like to use that helps you kind of manage or reduce um, those risks. And so put those in the chat as I'm going through some of these. And I'm sure that there's some overlap, which is great. So the first thing to do, and this is a really good practice for any more remote or backcountry thing you do, whether it's a day or multi-day, and it's not a bad practice for even like this quick 1 hour ride either, but just to communicate your itinerary with a friend or family member so that they know when to hear from you and at what point they don't hear from you that they should do something. And then what is that something? Um, and those for multi-day trips should be thought out pretty intentionally. Like if you're planning on being at camp at 5, I wouldn't recommend that they start calling in all the search and rescue at 5:15 because you could have just had a mechanical, maybe you found something beautiful to take a picture of, or you underestimated the timing. But when thinking about timing for that, what to do if you don't hear from it, there should be kind of a buffer for like those incidental time management pieces. Carrying a tracking and communication device that isn't cell phone service based is a really great tool that we have now. When I started bikepacking, satellite devices were about the size of like a cord phone, like gigantic things that were really expensive as well. And so these days, Garmin InReaches are super accessible. They can connect to your phone, so you can text through them. You can set up messages. It's almost makes the world too accessible to some people, but they are really great satellite communication devices. Spot devices are also out there, and there are some other companies who make them too. Um, when in town, I like to stop to resupply in public in like very in more trafficked places. And that is just my way of just like being present, people seeing me. I'm not like going around to the back of the gas station to like load my bike. I'm just like right out front, engaging with people, seeing through windows, that sort of thing. Um, One tip that I got from a friend who I have a lot of admiration for their experience and love for bikepacking long distances solo, is to ask for restaurant or lodging advice from locals in town. And I think that that's just a way to get, someone there who sees you to like, they'll send you hopefully like in the direction that you want to go, and rather than just like finding somewhere random online. Um, and I should add that a lot of these points were solicited from a variety of solo bikepackers, not just me. When camping in a public campground, choosing a spot near a family or an essential area, I really like that one. It's kind of similar to the being in town, but just like a position yourself adjacent to like eyes, basically, like things that are happening, things that people who will see what you're doing and know what's happening, not just like off by yourself where you could just be approached and no one knows what's happening. This one I really like. I tend to bike pack in more remote places, but when camping in remote areas, rather than choosing like the dispersed campsite that's maybe just through the woods from some other people or just like pulling over off the side of a trail, I go for a pretty long hike and take myself to camp somewhere that is actually not visible from roads or trails, so that I'm not just clearly this woman that's by herself on the side of the trail camping, but I'm just not going to be seen because I'm not within sight of some um random passerby. And this is for like those places where like there isn't activity, there's just like one vehicle might go by in an hour or one other hiker might go by. So I just eliminate the chance of a run-in by being right on the route. Um, the communication element, just like be kind, confident, and calm, and don't disclose your specific route details, destination, itinerary, or just like really any personal information. Just like kind of keep it chill and vague. And then carrying mace or pepper spray is a great one, and I would say bear spray is very effective at this. Yeah. Cool. It looks like there's a lot of additions in here, which is super helpful and awesome. So the next one is in this first category of staying safe, staying warm and dry. We talked about this a bit in gear selection, the concept of layering, but I just want to revisit it because when we think about what we're carrying and our available energy, the amount that we pack on bikepacking trips can be a art because we want to be comfortable and we want to recover well and we want to have the energy because we're comfortable and we're warm and we're dry and we aren't expending excessive energy just staying warm and dry, or being miserable. But we also don't want to be so comfortable that we have a change of clothes for every day and, like the king size mattress and maybe a full winter expedition tent if you don't need it for that environment. And then having that lighter bike reduces the amount of energy it takes you to pedal at every single pedal stroke and then increases your available energy for having fun on your bikepacking trip. So active layering, just going to visit this in the while out and the camping situation, but active layering is having layers that will breathe, dry, and potentially in for the outer layers shed water. And so when riding, we're trying to think about like there's this whole thing about being wet. Like I know we don't like being wet. It's kind of funny as people. Um, like our skin's pretty waterproof, but most people don't love being wet. But think about the temperature that you are. And so a lot of the times when riding in rain gear, we trap all that heat and then we get it wet on the inside because we're sweating because we have Gore-Tex on and then it's raining on the outside. And then you're just wet everywhere on the inside and the outside. And so when I'm riding, what I'm thinking about is temperature management and then moisture management to an extent. In a lot of cases, it is hard to prevent truly getting wet, but we just need to manage it by making sure that we're not creating all that moisture from sweating by wearing too much. I would personally rather have be warm and have a few layers get wet from sweating than to be really warm and sweating through and getting everything wet because of wearing too much clothing. Um, We talked about saving some sacred clothing for camp, like our sleeping bag, our down jackets, like our insulative layers, our sacred socks. Those are things that I'm not going to ride in because I then want those to be at camp to be used for generating that warmth when I'm sedentary. Like I'm not, it's my body heat isn't being generated by exercise. And then my body heat can be actively drying those base layers. It's kind of a balancing act of drying base layers at camp because you don't want to be making yourself cold and chilled by wearing wet clothing, but putting on a dry base layer and then putting your damper clothes that you rode in either on over it or inside your sleeping bag or just like inside your jackets. Your body heat can then help actively dry those things. In some climates that are really dry and arid, hanging up your clothes can be a strategy too for drying things out. But you just want to be careful of them not being blown away or chewed on by critters that like salty things. And I can say that I have had way more critters chewing on my clothes that are salty than I have had bear encounters. So there's something to think about. With sleeping, there is an art to staying warm sleeping. The first is where you sleep. Cold air sinks. And so while often flatter spots are lower, even in the micro scale of the terrain, finding slightly higher elevation spots in your campsite to sleep than right at the bottom. And then on the bigger picture, camping more on ridges rather than down in canyons, that can make the difference of like 10, even 15, even many double digits of a temperature difference. And often they'll be a little drier as well because of that moisture that can collect in drainages. So, and then on clear nights, sleeping in under trees and in a shelter rather than just out under the air, that will also keep you warmer because of how heat can be trapped from something right over you. Layering wise, there's a couple myths out there that I just want to debunk. First of all, the first one is sleeping naked in sleeping bags is warmer, and that's not true. And actually, your sleeping bag or the oil in your skin can impact your sleeping bag in a way that then reduces for a down sleeping bag, its ability to fluff and be really insulative. So wearing layers is really good care of your sleeping bag. And then ultimately layers are layers. And so wearing your layers to bed is going to keep you warmer in your sleeping bag. You're trying to reduce air that you're heating up with your body. And so if you have a bigger sleeping bag, then space that you fill, like the bottom being like empty because of shorter legs, or it just being really wide, like stuffing layers that you're not wearing into those cavities will reduce the amount of air that you need to um, heat with your own body. And then, and one thing with that, I have found that sleeping with my down jacket kind of as a quilt over me is actually warmer than wearing it because then it is fluffed up over top of me and I'm not just compressing the jacket on my back or whatever part of me is against my sleeping pad. So yeah. And otherwise there's some simple things like using a pillow, wearing a hat, making sure you wear socks, eating right before bed, doing some sit-ups or plank in your sleeping bag to generate some heat, taking a hot water bottle. Those are all strategies to stay warm. So that's the end of that section. I'm going to take some questions and then move right into the next one. Because as always, time is flying.
Sure. I'm gonna take co-host privileges and ask a few questions myself. But I also was gonna just add in just a little thought as we were going through the solo section, which I probably don't take all of the risk management precautions I should when riding solo, but I think another important thing is like trusting your gut and like a lot of these things of like when something feels off, then be extra cautious. I think some of the best part of traveling alone is like the interactions that you do have with people. And it like helps me, like restores faith in humanity, but because of like how great people can be. And I'll stay with folks that I meet on the side of the road sometimes. But it's like kind of, yeah, your level of comfort with doing that and, being safe in situations that might feel sketchy. But I did have a couple questions on the bear topic. Uh, One was just thinking about because I've traveled in black bear country, but not grizzly bear country yet. Um, so like the talk about like having no food ever in your tent, but then, like seeing folks, it's like sometimes you're going to be like you have all your things packed in your dry bag and there's been food in there at one point in time. Do you have any thoughts on like having utilizing a tent that like may have at one point you have had to go in and it was rainy and you had things that smelled in it, or like how strict people are for things like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think similar to all of these, you ultimately get to decide how thorough you are, and it's based on like how maybe worried you are about it, or even also just like, is that area known for there being aggressive bears, or has there been is an incident recently? Like those are all things that I would consider. But with food in the tents, like, and even to some extent, like a lot of times food, like the clothes that we're wearing will often be clothes that we've been wearing when we're out and we're eating. And so I just do my best to put everything that is food away and stored, and then to just like make sure that there's no massive like stains or like pocket full of crumbs that I'm taking into my tent. And that's what I feel good with. And with organizations like Knowles and Outward Bound and like where there's a lot of reuse of gear, like it doesn't seem like um the fact that clothes or shelters have encountered food before has caused issues.
Thanks. There's a question, why not keep food in the kitchen area instead of using three different locations?
That's a really good question. I think that um uh bear
Because it
biologist,
smells, right?
yeah, and I think a bear biologist would have a better answer, but I think that you're trying not to attract bears into where you are hanging out. And so if they find your food in your kitchen, then one, they could be like coming back when you come back to your kitchen where you are. And I think that you're just trying to disperse it all a lot so that they're not just like, oh, this is where all the food and the people with the food are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think because you don't want, yeah, you ideally don't want them coming over to these areas at all. So if you keep both the food in the bag, in the bear hang, and in the kitchen area, like that's going to be like double smell. So it, like, if you spread it out, hopefully they'll just stay away completely. Okay. I had a question about Ursacs because I've
Mhm.
thought about getting one and then gone down the rabbit hole of reading reviews and like just the fact that I guess this goes to the point of like if a bear actually gets it, like that they can just smash it up and like
Mhm.
people have had that of like a critter or a bear just they can't open it, but they can just basically destroy all of your food inside. And
Yeah, they would definitely be able to squish it all or smash it. And so I mean, most of our food is getting smashed anyway, just by being packed. Like when I'm thinking about like breads or chips and cookies, like
Mhm.
so that is definitely something that can happen. I think the goal is that they're not like tossing it so far away that you can't find it. And so that's why like tying it to something or securing it. Like Eric Parsons mentioned the pile of rocks. Which bears can move rocks. But yeah, I don't think that that's too. I mean, I think ultimately when a bear tries to get into your camp, like there's going to be some things like some damage. And I would rather have food that is really well secured than, and maybe the risk is it gets a little squashed than not.
Yeah.
Especially in places where like not having a bear hang. And like I know Kurt took an URSAC on the CDT because it just eliminated any question of like, where do I camp so I can have a good bear hang? Because it can be hard to find a good tree where you can actually get the string and it doesn't just get hung up in all the branches.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Someone asked about thoughts of playing music while riding through thick single track to keep bears away.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the music would probably have to be really loud to project in the way that our voices can when we really like yell. And I'd also wonder, and I don't know this, but I would wonder if it would be similar to why bear bells don't work, of just being this kind of like constant noise. And so it's not actually like alerting them, you know?
Just gotta sing loudly,
Yeah.
intermittently to the
Yeah, you
music,
just have to
maybe.
say.
And then back on just the topic of your nightly check, do you usually actually check the bolts with a wrench to check if they're tight, or how
I
kind of
don't personally
thorough
do
do
this
you get?
for every day, but I do check all the bolts on my bike on longer multi-day trips frequently. But a visual look through can be good.
Yeah, that's usually the most common thing to go wrong is the bolts get loose, I've
Yeah.
found. Um, all right, I think that's about all the questions for now.
Awesome. We'll have another round soon. Cool. So our next one is going to be, or our next topic, sorry, is the art of good camping, which is really a continuation of these last topics because risk management, um, like good camping practices can mitigate a lot of risks associated with camping. I'm going to talk briefly about campsite selection. And this is really redundant with any other traveling like backpacking, multi-day river trips, um, mountaineering to an extent. And the things that we're just thinking about is that campsites are safe, they're comfortable. We spend a lot of time at camp potentially. So like we want them to be comfortable and the impact we have. Come back to the impact we have a bit at the end, but for the safe, the main things are is we just don't want to camp in places that we'd be exposed to unexpected or like likely weather, and that's mostly like lightning. What happens if there's a microburst, like strong winds? Are there dead trees that could fall down? If it were to torrentially rain, is your campsite going to flood? Do you happen to be camped on a spot that will be just really windy, which isn't necessarily a huge risk other than like stuff blowing away. It's really hard to manage your temperature, could be really hard to cook well. You might be hard to manage your stove in a safe way. But yeah, generally floods, lightning, trees are the things that I'm thinking about for safe. The comfortable element, we like to sleep on flat places and have good views. Those two things don't always come in addition to the safe places. And so you really do need to think about, and sometimes you can camp in the places that are comfortable and scenic and aren't the safest, but you need to do that intentionally, knowing that like you're not going to get struck by lightning. So like this lower left picture, we're camped on a helicopter pad. highest peak in the Bradshaw Mountains in Arizona. And it is a time of year you can actually see like wildfire smoke way, way far away. Like it's so dry there that it's not monsoon season. A storm's not going to pop up that night. And we just know that. But you need to really know your region in order to make decisions like that. And then the impact, like again, we really like to camp in the most beautiful places where no one has ever been before, or like we like to tell ourselves that, and I have fallen to this as well, don't worry. But the best places for us to camp as far as the environment goes is where other people have camped and to concentrate use to impacted areas. So even if we're not a car, we don't have a car, camping at a car camping site rather than just like off in the forest right next to it is a better choice. On the camping note, stormproofing. The reason, so stormproofing is just how you manage your stuff when you're not riding. When we're riding, our stuff is presumably attached to our bike or our body in a way that it won't cause us to crash. When we're camping, we take all of our stuff out, all of our little bags. I like to joke that bike packing is just putting little bags in little bags in little bags. And if it's hard to stormproof when backpacking, when everything just goes into one big bag, it's really hard to stormproof when bike packing, when you have a lot of little bags and all these little things that come out of the little bags at camp, and it can be hard to stay organized. One of the main reasons that we want to be stormproofed is so that our gear that we have selected as important for keeping ourselves safe and comfortable can remain functioning and found. So when not stormproofed, our gear could blow away, it could get lost. Nature is generally not super organized. And it could also be either torn or punctured or rained on, or you could name it. A cow could come walk on it. And then you suddenly have gear that is either a sleeping pad that isn't holding air, or a tent that has a hole in it, or your down jacket's now wet, or your stove is missing. And so they're all small things. They seem like small things, and the organization as a solution may seem like a kind of nitpicky thing to focus on, but it is good camping practice to bring that skill to your bikepacking camp so that you can be efficient. You know where your stuff is, you use your stuff when you need it, and it's in good working order for the length of your trip. Okay, well set up shelters. This we'll go through pretty quickly, but I'm just bringing this up because the point of a shelter is to provide is the point of a shelter is to provide shelter. And shelters may not provide shelter if not set up well. And bike packing, because of the restrictions of space, how we're trying to generally have a lighter bike, but while being comfortable, shelters are a great way to reduce the volume and the weight of what you're carrying by taking more minimal shelters. But the more minimal the shelter, the more skill it will take to set it up in a really good way. Um, there are these kind of mid-like tarp shelter structures. They generally don't have floors but have poles, and these are going to really rely on well set up angles in order to achieve tautness. That one on the right is an example of that. This is a Black Diamond Beta Mid. It's a two-person shelter with no floor, and it works really well when it's set up really well, and it works horribly when it's not set up well, because there are two poles that are standing upright inside the tent, and it's just the tension of the stakes at the right angle that's creating that space and volume inside. Tents also, the direction that you pull on the guy lines will influence the direction of the fabric, and just staking them out so that they are funneling water away from your tent and are taut. Like you can see this fly is actually slouching, if a fly can slouch, sagging a bit here. And so if it were to rain, water would actually pool down this. Here's a more tightly set up tent in one of those prettier locations to camp. And then tarps are a personal favorite because they're so simple. And sorry, my dog's barking. Tarps are so simple, and you don't need to bring poles for them. You can use the handlebars of your bike, or you can use sticks that are found, like in this picture. Just two sticks that were already dead and down were found and set up. You can also bring little, I'm sorry. You can also bring little collapsible poles like you would for a mid to set up tarps, but they're amazing. They require very little gear, and you can set them up high or low. And when set up really well with the right direction to the wind or precipitation, they can provide a ton of shelter. So with fires, just want to touch on fires because for a lot of people, fires cannot exist without like camping cannot exist without fires. And fires are a part of camping, and they're what we do at night, and they're how we build community and how we share stories and how we're vulnerable with each other, and maybe how we kick food or stay dry. But we also, fires leave a lasting impact on the environment. And so I'm sorry, there's someone banging at my house. And so fires are something that we just need to use with intention. I'm not going to tell you not to use a fire, or to build a fire in the backcountry, but using existing fire rings, using a fire pan if that's something that you want to carry, and keeping them small, burning wood that is already dead and down, and smaller than our wrist is a great way to just make sure that we're not having a bigger impact on the environment around us, and to make sure that we can actually have a fire that is a size that can burn out and we can put out, so that we leave with a fire that is completely dead. And as probably anyone in the US knows, and we're probably around the world, like wildfires are a huge problem for the safety of communities, for the health of our broader landscapes, and sadly, a lot of catastrophic wildfires are caused by campfires that are left unattended, and by left unattended, that's often just that are like mostly out, but are technically still smoldering. Thanks for the feedback on the barking. Apparently FedEx just showed up at my house and was banging on my door. Huh. Um, okay, so, and just with the fires, also in the post resource PDF, I am including a link to just a really good resource on like really how to have a really well made leave no trace fire, because you can definitely have fires in a responsible way. So this one is my favorite topic. Yes, a new tent. My favorite topic of this workshop, and it is pooping outside. And I think how to poop outside is often taught for kind of outdoor recreation activities that will naturally go outside, but I think it's easy for cyclists to start venturing more into the outdoors by bike with the ability to have access to restrooms, and to end up in the situation where you're suddenly not around a restroom and need to poop outside, whether it's because you're just on a long day ride not near a restroom, or because you're camping and there are no restrooms, and not necessarily have the skills to poop responsibly outside. And also, it doesn't have to be a big uncomfortable thing to poop outside without a restroom. I think for a lot of people who go into wild places, one of the amazing things is actually that you get to do everything outside. You sleep outside, you move outside, you cook outside, and you poop outside. As you can probably see in this photo, when we're bikepacking, there aren't necessarily going to be restaurants in all the places that we choose to stop, whether it's for lunch in between huts or hotels, or if it's in a big remote expedition. So there are two things, if you just take these two things away, if you would take two things away about pooping outside that are new to you, I would like for you to take away, dig a hole, like bury your poop, and pack out any toilet paper that is not from that environment. Yes, we can go down the road of how things break down and are biodegradable, and ultimately the best way for our human waste to decompose in the soil is to just be human waste with natural to that environment materials. And for our waste, like just like how we wouldn't tear a page out of a book and just throw it into the woods, we're not burying our toilet paper or wet wipes. And when using toilet paper and wet wipes intentionally, as far as like the volume of that, then we can generate actually surprisingly little waste while also practicing really good hygiene. The finer points of pooping outside, so those are the two things, and those are just like dig a hole, pack out your toilet paper or wet wipes or whatever you wiped with that isn't from that environment. This is also very important, but go at least 200 feet from water and trails. The water is more, I'd prioritize that more than the trail if you had to choose one. We just don't want our water, our poop breaking down in running off into water sources that we're also drinking out of or other people are drinking out of. The hole that you dig should be 6 to 8 inches, unless in the desert, in arid environments, actually 4 to 6 inches is better because the depth of the topsoil that has more natural bacteria for breaking down your poop it's shallower than in more loamy forested environments where there's that topsoil is deeper. So with toilet paper, with toilet paper, you can use natural toilet paper, which can be a great way to reduce the waste you're packing out and also the materials you're carrying. And if you would like to put in the chat any natural toilet paper you like to use, there's all sorts of options out there, from smooth round rocks to very smooth, not prickly pine cones to debarked little sticks to some people like dead leaves. We try not to use living things like ripping up grass or plants. One word of warning with that is like you don't want to give yourself a rash on your butt because of using a plant that it turns out you're allergic to. And then snow is actually an incredible option because it's basically water. And a lot of people are also huge proponents of the backcountry bidet, which is using a water bottle to clean your butt after you poop, and then really good hand washing practices. So, something that I recommend is for, like we also really rely on our butts for sitting on our saddles. And so really good hygiene practice for bike packers could be to first wipe with natural toilet paper that you then bury, and you've collected that on your walk to where you're digging your hole. And then to do like a final clean with one wet wipe that you pack out. And then you get that clean finish. And as always, wash your hands so that you don't give your riding partners or yourself any sicknesses, illnesses. A backcountry pooping kit, a small trowel for digging cat holes, a really firm stick or a rock works well as well, but a trowel is going to be a lot more efficient, and you can get incredibly lightweight ones that conveniently will sit right against your down tube in your frame bag and weigh nothing. Natural, bringing the amount of pre-folded toilet paper or wet wipes that you need, and then just bringing the bag that you're going to pack everything out with. If you're in a group and you're sensitive to people seeing it, you can like wrap, put the plastic bag inside more of an opaque, like wax paper bag or something if you want to hide it. And that was that section. Um, are there any questions before we wrap up with Love Where You Ride?
Just a couple, none about pooping so far, although some discussion. Um, back to the tarps and sleeping. If you want to carry a tarp, what's a good size to carry and at the same time not add too much weight?
That's a good question. It depends on if you want it to be for one person or two person or even three person. I've generally carried two-person tarps. And I think that like 8 by 10 would be a good minimum. The main thing is you want it to be long enough that you have at least a foot on either end of the the tallest people's heads and feet, and you have the width, because when it's pitched in like an A-frame setting, and it's not going to be like a super steep 45-degree slope, but you do lose some width. And so like an 8 by 10 might feel more like 6 feet wide. And so that would probably be the smallest, like a pretty cozy two-person tarp. Um, and then also just know some tarps aren't actually squares, and the ridge line measurement might be a little longer. And so you're wanting to really think about like the length of that shorter wall.
A question, do you ever get animals checking you out when you sleep without a tent?
Yeah. Yeah, I've had a skunk walk on top of me. It was horrible. I did not get sprayed that time. Um, but that said, that's just kind of a bizarre situation, and technically I was backpacking. Yeah, I think a lot of times I probably do get checked out quite a bit, but I don't know because I'm asleep. And I think that there's also something to be said for, like tents may deter animals, but ultimately, like if an animal wants to check you out, they're going to figure out how to check you out. And the thing to continue to remember is that a lot of them just want nothing to do with us. And if they do, then like it's rare and there's probably something going on. Like you have food with you.
Mhm. Another question, now onto the pooping discussion. What's wrong with biodegradable wipes?
Well, there's nothing wrong with buying them. A waste management expert would have to talk about like the role of biodegradable things in our like landfills. But when we think about what we're putting into the environment, the best practices is to not be adding waste, unnatural waste to the environments that we're traveling in. And so that's like an apple core is biodegradable, but that apple isn't from that environment. And so that's adding waste that to that environment that shouldn't be there. And something to note about, especially around the pooping topic of like toilet paper, and wet wipes, is that, and this is both for like surface poops and buried poops, like when we have that trash with our poop, like that can be dug up and then scattered or like dispersed by other animals too. And so we just like through Leave No Traces research, like the best practice is to just pack out everything that we bring in. And that's everything from like toilet paper to food scraps to like the micro trash to anything that is labeled biodegradable. Like even like a biodegradable coffee filter. Like we wouldn't like leave that at camp.
Mhm. And then do you have to hang your bag of used toilet paper like you hang your food?
I do more broadly, I do hang my trash with my food in its own bag, but like I hang it because that's a smellable. If it's just unused toilet paper, I wouldn't consider that, like if it's clean
Used
unused
toilet
toilet
paper.
paper, used. I don't think you would have to do that. It's worth researching though.
And then between bear spray and bear horns, in your experience, are horns just as effective?
Well, they would do different things. A horn would make noise, but bear spray is actually a defense mechanism that will actually stop an attack. So yes, bear spray is the effective tool for protecting yourself from a bear attack.
I think that's all the questions we have
Awesome.
here. Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna wrap up with putting this all together. A couple of years ago, we Bikepacking Roots partnered with the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics to work on their 7 principles of Leave No Trace to adapt them and to just write language specific for bikepackers. And then we took it a step farther with the positive impact bikepacking practices. We've talked a lot about these principles already. And so just to summarize this session and a lot of what we've talked about in the last 7 workshops, I'm going to run through these. So, and there's some fun mnemonics out there for remembering the 7 principles of Lean No Trace, but the first is plan ahead and prepare. We talked a lot about this in the first webinar. It's basically just doing all your research to make sure that you have a plan to mitigate risks so that you have a minimal impact on the environment and the communities that you ride through by being prepared and not needing a rescue that's high impact or having to cut down a tree to have a fire because you weren't prepared for the storm that was coming, etc. Number 2 is travel and camp on durable surfaces. Generally, for cyclists, we're traveling on durable surfaces. The main thing to note is that when bikepacking, if you encounter bad mud, you do have to make a decision to, at some point, to not ruin that surface, especially if it's a trail, by riding through it, and to wait for it to dry in order to proceed or to find an alternative route. Kurt showed us the interactive map layer in Bikepacking Roots' website where we do share some there's like a death mud map. I think that it's being currently updated, but that's a resource. And a lot of route planning resources will talk about what happens to the route when it's wet. With the camping on durable surfaces, I talked about that. Those are basically the impacted surfaces, rocky surfaces, surfaces that don't have like vegetation actively growing on it. Number 3 is dispose of waste properly. The best practice is to pack out everything, including all waste, whether it's food or toilet paper or tiny scraps to your bar wrapper, and to dispose of your human waste properly. Number 4, leave what you find. For this one, for cyclists, we're generally not trying to collect a lot of things and add weight to our bikes, but just think if you do find things like arrowheads or cultural artifacts, just thinking like being conscientious of like, leaving those things in their environment and for others to experience. And then one important thing when traveling internationally as bike packers is just to make sure that your bike isn't transporting invasive species. And this isn't even just internationally, but between different big biotic communities and landscapes. And then minimizing campfire impacts. We talked about that in a whole section because everyone loves camping with a fire and you totally can do that. There are just really good ways to do that and a lot more harmfully impactful ways to do that. Number 6, respect wildlife. Everything that we talked about around managing bear and animal encounters is a part of respecting wildlife because ultimately, when it all is said and done, when humans have bad interactions with wildlife, particularly bigger wildlife like bears, wolves, mountain lions, those animals are the ones that get the kind of consequence. Like bears they'll be euthanized or relocated, and ultimately, that could be because of a response that they had to you because you weren't necessarily traveling in that habitat in a way that helps them help themselves. I think one thing just to think about with bikes is that we can move really fast and approach wildlife quickly. And even for wildlife that isn't potentially as harmful, like herds of deer, elk, um, they just giving them a chance to uh move away at their pace and not really like flushing them out because we're going 20 miles an hour. And last one is be considerate of other visitors. And this one is a huge one for bikepackers to think about because while bikepacking has grown hugely in the last 10 years, we are still a pretty new user group, and there are a lot of people out there recreating who have no idea what we're doing, which is cool because we get to be the people who share what bikepacking is with a lot of the world. And the way that we encounter equestrians or hikers or um ranchers or you name it, like all the people out there in the world, we get to leave an impression on what bikepackers are like. And we get to inform that kind of impression of a user group, which then circles back to how land managers will um, think of us and respond to us as we advocate for bikepacking routes and access. Which leads me to the final note on positive impact bikepacking practices. A lot of Leave No Trace is very focused, excuse me, to while out in more undeveloped environments. And we just want to identify that, there is bikepacking racing out there, and a lot of bikepackers move from on their trip from urban areas to more suburban to more rural to more wild and back, and that's a big transition. And the way that we excuse me, come into towns, resupply, how we spend our money, how we pick up after ourselves, the rules that we do or don't follow, that all has an impact. And so we just really encourage people to um, be great stewards of the sport, support the communities that you bike pack through, and please also camp and bike pack by the rules that those communities set forth. I'm going to take questions and end on this slide that is also just sharing our final workshop is not on the every other Wednesday schedule. It is Tuesday, March 26th. Fixed in the Field, Troubleshooting Bikepacking Mechanisms with Leah Fantel from Upshift Workshop. And I'm really excited for that workshop. And before we move into the rest of March, I'd love to answer any final questions.
Yeah, feel free to type in any final questions if you have them. We don't have any yet, but we'll echo what Kate said. Leah's an amazing mechanic and teacher, and I'm really excited about that session. And I can also give a plug for yeah, generally if you like these workshops, as you've probably seen in my other emails, consider giving a donation to Bikepacking Roots. Right now we are currently fundraising for our BIPOC Bike Adventure Grant, which we started in 2020, and we'll be launching our third round of grants for BIPOC bikepackers, and the funds will go to grants for community leaders that are wanting to lead trips or have gear libraries. So if that's something that you're particularly interested in supporting, we've got a really cool giveaway right now with Oveja Negra for $300 gift certificate for some awesome bikepacking bags. So check us out for that. It looks like a couple questions came in, some on the previous session. So yes, if you're just joining I will send out an email later this week with links to all of the previous recordings and which are on Zoom. If people are still having trouble receiving those emails, then you can just shoot me an email. It's noelle@bikepackingroots.org. And I'll make sure to get those to you. And then there was one question, dropper post for seat tube suspension. Which would you go with?
Oh, one or the other. I love both. I think it would really depend. For primarily road riding, I would choose a hardtail with maybe a dropper post. For more technical riding, generally probably a suspension, rear suspension than a dropper post because you get to use it potentially more. But I don't know. That's a very terrain and rider dependent question. Thank you all so much. Sorry for the dog barking. Thanks for the patience with that. And thank you all for tuning in. It's been a pleasure to be teaching these, and I'm really excited to participate and co-host the last one as Leah teaches us all. So I hope to see you on the 26th.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.